So Trident, do we need it? In the media and well, prior to the Paris attacks, which of course is a terrible, terrible thing, it was one of the more greater topics of debate. And there seems to be a lot of people who are either they say absolutely outright, we don't need it, it's ridiculous, we shouldn't have it anymore, it's an obsolete piece of technology, and other people who say we absolutely need it because we need that sort of defence. Now, I don't know. I mean, the people on the left who say they don't need it, some points are very good, some points are very bad, and the same with the right. Some points are very good, some points are very bad. And I think a lot of the reasons why people are making it is because they've not really thought about the answer. So what I want to do with this is try and open up an argument, a debate. I'm going to put forward my own opinion, which I think is fairly objective. So see what people think. Now, Trident itself is a nuclear arms program. Now, what we have is we have missiles that are on submarines, so they float around. You don't know where they are. Should it ever be that we need to use a nuclear weapon, we can attack at any point without the opposition necessarily knowing until the missile is launched. And even then, there's not necessarily a guarantee that they'll be able to identify that it's a nuclear weapon until it's too late. Which sounds very good, sounds very effective. It's actually a very clever means of why we did it, because the initial construction of them was to try and combat the Russians during the Soviet War. Now, the Russians had vast resources compared to us and were able to build many, many more nuclear weapons in a shorter space of time with greater capability, and we just couldn't compete on that scale. America could, and America did, and they both had ridiculous numbers of nuclear weapons. I think there was enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world 10,000 times over, something like that. Anyway, but we couldn't compete on that level. So, cleverly, what we did was we put them on submarines so that we can move them around, so that while we don't have anywhere near the number of weapons that you have, you don't know where our weapons are, whereas the Russian and American nuclear weapons were chiefly in silos, which means they're in a fixed location. So you could, in the event of them being fired, you could know that if there was something being fired from there, that it was a nuclear missile. Now, obviously, the Cold War is over. Russia isn't exactly fantastic. We're not on great terms with them, but we're not in the midst of a war with them. And the new primary threat that we have today is terrorism. And so this sort of and now that Trident is due for renewal, some people are asking, should we have it? Do we need it? Now, as I've just sort of said, they were originally built in the Cold War. Cold War's over. Nuclear weapons are only really effective against an enemy state to begin with. So the current global climate, there are not really wars in that sort of capacity anymore. So we do still have wars. For example, we very recently, we've had Afghanistan and Iraq, which, well, you can argue this, but a lot of that was to do with terrorism. Well, we had wars in that. I suppose before that, you could say we had the Gulf War was the Iraqi War, really, but you could say the Falklands or there's various wars that have gone on. None of which, since the Second World War, have had a nuclear weapon. And the incident where there was a nuclear weapon, which was the Second World War, which was Nagasaki and Hiroshima in Japan by America, they were the first and only instances that we have where a nuclear weapon was used against an enemy. And at that point, it was not fully known or anticipated the amount of damage that could cause. But even so from their point of creation, which was that point, to the present day, they've only been used once in a war and have not been used since. All wars have been resolved in other means. Now, using that sort of statistic, you would think, well, okay, it makes more sense rather than to invest money in Trident to invest money in the other means of war. So you got more troops on the ground, so you got better intelligence, better counterintelligence, all that sort of business. That's actually something I do kind of think. The nature and how wars tend to be played out, it's not really worth putting money into a nuclear arms race. We're very close allies with America as well. So if it got to a point whereby we were using nuclear weapons, that should mean that America is at a point where they would want to be using nuclear weapons as well. And they have a lot more than us. They have tens more than us. And to me, it makes more sense to invest our our resources in other areas. I mean, the National Health Service, for example, which I know is not a military thing, but it needs to increase by, it needs an additional 8 billion every year. So to cut Trident would solve that instantly, and then you'd have plenty left over as well. But even so, I mean, I understand that there's thousands of jobs that are associated with it. That money could easily go towards retraining them, repositioning them in other jobs. We have plenty of service sector jobs which we could do with filling. There's also plenty of other military jobs we could do. We need more soldiers than we have. Not only that, the soldiers that we do have need better weapons, need better armor. And when I remember, there's a Bremner, Bird and Fortune, which was a comedy trio. And they did a sketch once over I think it was the Iraqi war. And the other guy went, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Right, David, you get to wear the helmet, because there was a shortage of suitable artillery for the troops. So rather than spending money on nuclear weapons, which, yes, are a deterrent, but we'll get to who exactly they're a deterrent to, you've got to ask, maybe the soldiers that we send into the wars before it escalates to a point where we need to use a nuclear weapon, perhaps if they were better equipped, better trained, and in greater numbers, we might be able to cessate the situation before nuclear weapons are ever used. Then additionally, if it is to a point where we do need to use nuclear weapons, where's America been? Surely America, our closest ally, who call us their closest ally, would have got involved before that point. And this is before you take into account that the UN will have failed, and the EU will have failed, and and NATO would have failed. There's so many factors that have to happen before there be a nuclear war. Taking into account again, the vast majority of countries do not have nuclear weapons. The vast majority don't. And they all seem to exist. In fact, South Africa used to have nuclear weapons and then disarmed, and no longer has them. And the interesting thing is that when South Africa disarmed and finally didn't have any nuclear weapons, they weren't suddenly hurled upon and wiped off the face of the earth because they no longer had a suitable deterrent, despite the fact that they were an apartheid system and are hated by a lot of people, and have a lot of natural resources, and have a very polarized political system because of the history of the blacks and the whites and mistreatment and race crime, all this sort of business. They still exist, and they're still very strong. And in fact, their economy is not too bad. They're okay. Why are we in more danger? Now, our main threat, actually, of today, of our time, is terrorism. Now, again, I would rather invest more money in security measures. I'd rather have more people that are tapping phones or monitoring the internet in a halfway between a Big Brother society and a free and liberal society. I'd rather have more people that listen in and monitor people who are of interest in the case that they do something, but then allow them to exercise their free rights, than just having some people in it with a nuclear weapon. What else is there? I mean, okay, again, with the nuclear weapon, who would we use it against? We can't. It's completely ineffectual against a terrorist group like ISIS. If anything, actually, it's a liability, because by the fact that we've got that floating around, if ever somehow they were able to infiltrate the military system and get on board one of the submarines, they would use it. It's extremely unlikely that we would ever be in a position, if we're in a position where we're going to use it ourselves, Britain, UK will probably already be decimated. So in a way, what's the point of firing it? Because the opposition is the only human life left. The other sort of, my biggest argument, actually, right, if we were to drop Trident, you've got a country like Japan. Japan has a bigger economy than us. It has had fewer terrorist attacks than us. It's interesting. I'm using Japan as well because Japan is the only country that's ever had a nuclear weapon dropped on it. So it's got a bigger economy. It's had fewer terrorist attacks. It has no nuclear weapons. It's never had nuclear weapons, I don't think. And yet it survives and it flourishes. And in fact, it's a better country than us. It's stronger than us. The only counter argument that you could kind of have is that because we're in a nuclear power, we get, I don't know, I suppose we kind of get certain certain privileges, because you've got the. Let me just try and look up very quickly what it's called. I mean, here the United Nations Security Council. We're permanent members on it. So there's us as France. There's China, Russia, America. I think it's us, and that's everyone. That's the big five. Now, all of us happen to be nuclear powers in our own right. Now, I don't think, as far as I'm aware, that a requirement of that is that you have to have nuclear weapons, because there are other countries that do have nuclear weapons, such as India and Pakistan, neither of which, or North Korea, neither of which are allowed to be permanent members. It's not an actual requirement, and in fact, I think, given our position on that, rather than having a nuclear weapon, it would be better to have a larger military prowess in other fields, so grassroots troops on the ground. Then you're actually able to do more in the world. Similarly, you've got countries like Germany, which has a collective nuclear arm. So there's several European countries, I believe it's several European countries, which are all collectively sharing a nuclear program. Now, I don't see why the UK's needs to be independent, especially because our main threat is that we might go to war with someone, so we need to have a nuclear weapon so that we don't get defeated by them. If we have a shared joint nuclear program with another country, how are we ever going to go to war with that country? So surely the more countries that have a collectivized nuclear program makes the need to use them, even less likely. So why don't we just sort of say to Germany, hey, Germany, and I don't know the other countries that have the joint program with it, but use them as an example. Hey, why don't you all just share 50% of ours so that our cost is halved, our protection remains the same, our likelihood of using them is even lower because there's more countries that are in a joint armament agreement with us. I mean, we have an agreement with France whereby we share some aircraft carriers. Now, as soon as you do that, it makes war with France almost impossible, because we share military personnel and resources, which is fantastic, because it simultaneously keeps the jobs that the soldiers have and the Navy personnel have and all that sort of business, because we need to have it, because we have the trade agreement and the military agreement, because the military agreement melds our two countries together, and if you separate them, then the war becomes more likely. So you can't separate them, which means the jobs always have to be there. But at the same time, they, without ever firing a gun, are making the war almost impossible. So why not have it? I mean, to me, I'm much more worried about being killed in military terms by a terrorist attack. I would much rather have more resources spent towards terrorism. I would rather have more resources spent towards troops, so that in regional fighting, when it does break out, so say for example the Falklands happens again, you have troops that can actually go there to protect, defend, retake, whatever it is that they need to do. Trident doesn't make sense to me in that capacity. So let's try and get a bit of a debate going, if anyone's going to listen to this. Comment away, set up, reply to other people's comments. I'm hoping to try and get some sort of momentum on this and get people talking about it. So what are your views? What do you think of other people's views? What do you think of my views? Yeah, let's go.